At night, I left her in her room with one of her headaches. I would go to the library and read. And later, when she looked for me, I wasn't there. She couldn't know I was with Leslie, but she knew I hadn't gone ashore. She'd checked on that. Leslie and I always had to be discreet, not only because of Mother, but because of his position on the ship as well. One of our favorite trysting places was on the freight deck, among the crates and canvas-covered automobiles. There was a particular limousine.
Come out at once.
Trotter.
I don't care, I'm glad.
Go to your cabin.
I want to marry your daughter. We're engaged to be married.
Do you allow what you call your officers to address a passenger in that manner?
You'll report to my quarters at once, Trotter.
Go to your cabin.
I had said I was glad, and I was glad. He had defied my mother and placed me on a throne, and before a witness, too. It was the proudest moment of my life.
From 1942, the great film Now Voyager, one of the peaks in Bette Davis's incredible career, as we continue our discussion of one of the greatest women of the silver screen. You've tuned in to Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio KCBX, and to continue this daunting discussion of the great career of one of the great ladies of the screen is my very good friend, Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, the undeniable czar of film on the Central Coast, King Vidor Award-winning, and a guy I'm very proud to call friend. I'm talking about your friend as well as my friend, Jim Dee. And Jimmy, here we go, part two of one of the great actresses in cinema history.
And you know, what a ride. If our listeners didn't catch our program last week, you can log on to the website, kcbx.org, and look for Take Two under the podcasts. And as we spent last week looking at the early career of Bette Davis, from her early work on Broadway, then her first screen appearances really weren't that successful with Universal, and then Warner Brothers signs her to a contract, and then the rest is history. And we got about to the 1940s, where her career is peaking. At the time of Now Voyager, where we heard our opening clip, apparently Bette Davis, one of the highest paid women, if not the highest paid woman in America.
Absolutely. And this film, Now Voyager, coupled with Dark Victory, perhaps her best films of her golden period. And Now Voyager, what an it's almost like she's playing two different people, a dual role, which is something she would go on to do years later in a film called Dead Ringer, which is a little different, but it has a connection to this film because her male lead in Now Voyager is the great Paul Henreid. You might remember him as Victor Laszlo from Casablanca, and if you didn't know that, shame on you. But, about 22 years later, 1964, she did a film called Dead Ringer, which is a totally different time in her career, which was directed by Paul Henreid. So I think what happened is they really, working with Paul Henreid, she was really able to tap into being two sides of her powerful coin as an actress in one film. And here she plays kind of a dominated, beaten down daughter of a very domineering mother who through meeting Paul Henreid and falling in love with him, flowers and becomes... Suddenly she turns into the Bette Davis we know and love. And of course, like Dark Victory, this is about a 4.5 handkerchief film. But again, like Dark Victory, it is done extremely well. Great actors in all kinds of roles in this film. Well written. And it's got that A-list Warner Brothers feel to it, which is top-notch production values. She's tremendous in this. The chemistry between her and Paul Henreid is incredible.
It really is. And Bob, noting her rather chameleon aspect in this film, which she has all throughout her career. In fact, when we get into the shall we say, the next part of her career up until, she was working up until her death. She was really the working actor. In Now Voyager, she's like a librarian, the sheltered librarian, and little glasses and a very frumpy dress and everything. And of course, later on, she blossoms into the great Bette Davis that we all know and love, who is in love with Paul Henreid. And to watch the transformation with the help of the great Claude Rains is just great in this motion picture.
You cannot have a film without Claude Rains.
We need to do a show on Claude Rains.
There'll be more. But Jimmy, I think you just hit on something. I was listening to you talk, and a little light went on in my head. And I think Now Voyager really, as an artist, as an actress, really, I think, in a sense, planted a seed for a template that she would go back to, especially as she got older, where she'd play two different people who were actually the same person in a movie. And you would see this formula used again and again in Dead Ringers, Pocketful of Miracles. Oh, my goodness. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, The Nanny. Believe it or not, even though some of these films are not up to the caliber of Now Voyager, but I think Now Voyager gave us an indication of her versatility as an actor, which would serve her well as she got older.
We opened up our program tonight with a clip from Now Voyager, the downtrodden daughter of that domineering mother portrayed, Bette Davis, the downtrodden one. This is later on in the film where she is in love with Paul Henreid, but it is an unrequited love. It is a love that cannot be fulfilled except through the fact that Bette Davis is caring for Tina, who is Paul Henreid's daughter.
And also Jim Dee's daughter's named Tina, too.
And here is part of Now Voyager where, Bob, we talked about this is a four handkerchief movie or a weepy or, and it's a good thing, if you watch these movies and you do want to get emotionally involved. But what I think is great in this next scene we're going to play for you, is the great writing in this film and the attention to detail of the romance between these two characters. We'll just play the clip. This is from Now Voyager. This is Bette Davis talking to Paul Henreid with regard to taking care of his daughter, Tina.
Apparently you haven't the slightest conception of what torture it is to love a man and to be shut out, barred out, to be always an outsider and an extra.
Charlotte, let me...
Why, when Tina said she wanted to come home and stay with me, well, it was like a miracle happening. Like having your child, a part of you. And I even allowed myself to indulge in the fancy that both of us loving her and doing what was best for her together would make her seem actually like our child after a while. But I see no such fancy has occurred to you. Again, I've been just a big sentimental fool. It's a tendency I have.
Wait a minute. I was afraid you were keeping Tina out of pity. But there was no note of pity in your ridicule of me just now. Now I know you still love me, and it won't die what's between us. Do what we will. Ignore it, neglect it, starve it. It's stronger than both of us together.
Please let me go.
Charlotte.
Please let me go.
Oh, Well, my heartstrings are being pulled just listening to that, and the fact that here he is embracing her, and of course she's saying we have to stay apart, despite the fact that we're madly in love with each other. Folks, again, watch this movie. Don't hold back the tears. That's what its intentions are, and it does very well. Now Voyager from 1942. Well, Bob, we got a lot of ground to cover because, after Now Voyager, of course, Bette Davis, all throughout her life, worked she didn't stop working, and after Now Voyager, just naming some of the titles of her films: Watch on the Rhine, Old Acquaintance, Mr. Skeffington, The Corn is Green, A Stolen Life, Deception, Winter Meeting, and we're talking about 43 through about 48, or 46, 48. And I think what's notable about this period, Bob, is it wasn't until her quintessential film, All About Eve, where it seems like she reinvented herself, also in one of the most incredible films about actors, about the theater ever, one of the most intelligent and witty scripts of all time, and Bette Davis, not only with an incredible ensemble cast around her, but really just who else but Bette Davis could be in All About Eve. But I think it's important to note that she was starring in a number of films and, not quite making the mark that she made in some of her films in the early 40s, but again, continuing to work and reinventing herself. And All About Eve, we can go on and on. We could do a whole show about this particular film.
Well, what's interesting, Jimmy, is, the films after Now Voyager, Watch on the Rhine, fine film, Mrs. Skeffington, very, very good, Corn is Green, wonderful movie. These are not bad films, but what's happening here is that the studio system is kind of dragging her down a little bit. She's chomping at the bit to do other things, and she's having a hard time breaking out of, every movie she's got to be in now has got to be a weepy melodrama. And I don't think it's any accident that when she did All About Eve, she had left Warner Brothers, and I believe this was the first film she made for under contract to 20th Century Fox.
Yes.
And this is a big film for her in many ways. Professionally, she gets the Joseph Mankiewicz script and a great character in Margot. What the heck is her name? Margot Channing. Of course, Margot Channing. How silly of me. And she gets a great character that she has probably been dying to play for about 8 years. Subsequently, on the personal side, she's met the man who will be her husband for the next 10 tumultuous years, Gary Merrill. And he's also in this film, and he's also very good. It goes without saying, I guess if I had to pick one Bette Davis movie, and I never would ever say picking one of anything because, like rubber-suited horror movies, like you name one and then you think of 5 others. But I would say this film might be the one because she is incredible in this film. She's really got a grasp of this character inside and out. She is the driving force of this film. This film, All About Eve, has one of the strongest ensemble casts I've ever seen in any movie. We're going to play a clip, and you know what? We're not even going to say who all these people are. We'll talk about it afterwards, but she shines. And not only does she shine, she knows when to step back, too. I mean, her performance is just fantastic. Yes, she's over the top. Yes, she's a diva. Yes, she can be a bitch. Yes, she can be all these things, but she can also be vulnerable. She can be subtle. She can be tender. And that makes this film really great watching. And I highly recommend this film to anybody out there who hasn't seen it or would steer clear of this because, this ain't my kind of movie. Just trust me on this one. You sit down and watch this and enjoy the dialogue and the great acting. This is one of the best movies of all time, easily.
We're talking about All About Eve from 1950 and how Bette Davis pretty much reinvented, resuscitated her career, which was going along, as you mentioned, Bob, but this was a definite high point. And, you know, I just want to make mention of the amazing script here. And you know, this is like a Billy Wilder film, the idea that the writing is so sharp and so funny. There's Thelma Ritter in there and George Sanders as a theater critic. And I swear,
great in this.
The dialogue is so biting and satirical and smart. And the dialogue throughout the entire film, it just plays out just like we don't see in films of today. And just a great assessment of what really happens and what those folks on the stage that you think are very lofty are like in real life. We don't need to really talk about the actual discussions that are happening at this party in All About Eve, but it does contain some of those famous words that we know that Bette Davis is famous for. This is from All About Eve.
Margot, nothing you've ever done has made me as happy as you're taking Eve in. I'm so happy you're happy.
Now look here, you haven't been running a settlement house exactly. The kid has earned her way. You had a pretty mixed up inventory when she took over. Merchandise laying all over the shop.
You've got Margot mixed up with a 5 and 10 cent store.
Make it work off, Goodman. Everything on his proper shelf, eh, Max? All done up in little ribbons. I could die right now and nobody'd be confused. How about you, Max?
How about me what?
Suppose you drop dead. What about your inventory?
I ain't going to drop dead. Not with the heat.
This is the most ghoulish conversation. Thank you.
Nothing.
Max! Mon vieux! Fifi!
The kid, Junior that is, will be down in a minute unless you'd like to take her drink up to her.
I can get a fresh one. Karen, you're a Gibson girl.
The general atmosphere is very Macbethish. What has or is about to happen?
What is he talking about?
Macbeth.
We know you. We've seen you like this before. Is it over or is it just beginning? Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
How are you? Mademoiselle, je vous remercie infiniment pour l'invitation.
Enchanté to you, too. I distinctly remember Addison crossing you off my guest list. What are you doing here?
Dear Margot, you were an unforgettable Peter Pan. You must play it again soon. You remember Miss Caswell, don't you?
I do not. How do you do?
We've never met. Maybe that's why.
Miss Caswell is an actress, a graduate of the Copacabana School of Dramatic Art.
That voice of George Sanders, and he is brilliant in this film. And the woman in tow with George Sanders, the extra, is Marilyn Monroe from All About Eve.
Oh, boy. We got Hugh Marlowe, we got Celeste Holm in an Academy Award-winning performance, I might add.
This film pretty much swept the Academy Awards, even though Bette Davis was nominated, but she did not win. But this film took it all home, pretty much.
Pretty much, and this is a great film, and folks, you got a nice sampling right there of the rapier dialogue, which, like Jimmy said, you just are not going to hear this stuff anymore. And you know what I like, Jim, was listening to that clip when she's obviously pretty steamed about Eve Harrington, who's played by Ann Baxter, who's about to make her dramatic entrance and upstage her, the star, at her birthday party. And right when she's, talking to Max, the producer, about how much he's worth when he's dead, the piano just very strategically starts plunking away at that point. They just don't have cocktail parties like that anymore. And this is what a wonderful film.
And the comedic level is at such a, I can't really put it, but an intelligent level. Here they're talking about dropping dead and this banter that you would have at a theater party, and here's an onlooker saying, well, "What a ghoulish conversation!" And pause. Bette Davis, thank you. It's just it's brilliant. So great for Bette Davis that she did have this incredible vehicle in 1950 to further her career with this great cast, and Again, what we should note here as we get into the 1950s, she did continue her career in film, and we are going to talk about her great team up with Ernest Borgnine in 1956 in The Catered Affair. But we should mention that after that, and we don't have evidence other than that, this massive filmography of hers, but Bette Davis was on television a lot in the late 50s and through the 60s. Her television appearances included a Playhouse of Stars. She was on everything from Bonanza to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and just on and on. It was just even an appearance on Laugh-In.
How about that?
But she did, she reminds me of, when we've talked about Robert De Niro, we talk about Robert De Niro as a great actor, but again, he likes to work, and we could probably name 10 films of his that are good films, but they aren't Raging Bull, or they aren't some of the great work that Robert De Niro has done, but he likes to work, and I think we can apply that same idea to Bette Davis. She just liked to work, and maybe she wasn't real happy with some of the vehicles, but she did like to work.
Well, if we notice in the early 50s, we don't see a lot of films in her filmography. And I think a lot of that could be attributed to her trying to play the other role, which was wife and mother. The one that, well, the latter, the former as opposed to the latter, was very difficult for her. She had a lot of problems keeping her marriages together. The Gary Merrill one, she tried real hard, to the point where they went to England and did a movie together called Another Man's Poison. She had her honeymoon on the set of The Frogmen, which had Gary Merrill and Dana Andrews and the aforementioned, a guy we just honored recently, one of the great stars, Richard Widmark. So his career, while not at that time, at that brief time in the late 40s to about the mid-50s, he was a fairly big star. And I guess she tried to play the 50s housewife, which was to support him in his career and kind of let hers suffer. And I tend to think that was pretty rough for her. But that being said, she did... In 1952, she returns to Warner Brothers, does a little number with one of our favorite stars, Sterling Hayden, called The Star. And it's almost like, it's not nearly as good as All About Eve, but it almost seems like she's that person again, only this time the bottom has fallen out, and she finds aid and comfort from a fellow Yankee iconoclastic outcast in Sterling Hayden. I just thought it was interesting to mention that film because I liked the teaming of them. This was Hayden at the time when HUAC was, tearing a strip off of him, and he was a pretty troubled cat. But they actually made a real decent, oddly enough, I wouldn't even call it an A movie, almost like a B picture. But I've always had a soft spot for 1952's The Star.
And the same year, Bob, and reflecting on what you mentioned about her marriage to Gary Merrill, before she made The Star, a film called Phone Call from a Stranger, features Gary Merrill, as well as Michael Rennie and our favorite Hugh Beaumont.
Oh, that's right.
And
the great Hugh Beaumont.
But noting in this film, in fact, I watched some of it just the last few days, Bette Davis's part is very small. You're waiting for her to appear in the initial opening credits on this film, and starring Bette Davis, and it's really a very small supporting role. So, as you mentioned, she was stepping back and not working as hard, even though she was, active in films, but I think she was more active trying to keep the household together during the 50s and into the mid-50s, as you said, Bob. Well, let's go up to 1956 and a wonderful little film that, I don't know, this usually doesn't pop up as a Bette Davis great, but I get a big kick out of this one. Bette Davis and Ernest Borgnine getting a nice lead role in The Catered Affair, 1956. And Bob, I was telling you, just thinking of Bette Davis and Ernest Borgnine, you got to think of Ralph and Alice Cramden. In this film, Ernest Borgnine is a taxi driver, and Bette Davis is Alice Cramden, home making some food for her hard-working husband who's been driving the cab all day. But the stars also in this film include Debbie Reynolds as their daughter, who is going to marry a very young Rod Taylor.
Who is one of our all-time favorites, even if he is some Aussie pipsqueak.
But we're talking about The Catered Affair, and we highly recommend this film. It's a real interesting turn for the entire cast. It's kind of a nice little film.
Well, you know, what this film has got, aside from a young Rod Taylor, it's got a story by Gore Vidal, a screenplay adaptation by Patty Chayefsky. It's directed by Richard Brooks, who is one of America's great unknown filmmakers. This film, I could see where a lot of folks would confuse it with Marty, because there's Borgnine playing the working schlub again, and Marty is a Patty Chayefsky vehicle as well. But it's a really good film in the sense that it's about regular people. Borgnine's a cab driver. Bette Davis is his wife. She's unpretentious. Believe me, you won't even recognize her. There's no glamour there at all. And a very young Debbie Reynolds, fresh off of The Tender Trap with Sinatra, does a nice turn here as just the regular, you know, she's the nice gal next door, and she meets a handsome, nice guy. And Rod Taylor is very good in this. He actually comes across not, you know, we know Rod Taylor is kind of, you know, he's kind of sure of himself and he can handle himself real well. But here he's kind of a young, not quite so sure of himself kind of guy. He does a great American accent. He's very believable. This is a terrific little film.
We're talking about The Catered Affair with Ernest Borgnine and the great Bette Davis. And here's the scene, if you can imagine, Ernest Borgnine home from work, eating dinner, and Bette Davis has just made dinner, and Debbie Reynolds announces she's going to be married. It doesn't seem to cause too much of a stir until we talk about the cost of the wedding. This is from The Catered Affair.
Ma, Ralph and I are getting married.
Well, Jane, that's very nice.
Well, what finally decided us was Ralph's got this friend, you know, in California, but his wife's pregnant, so he asked Ralph if he knew somebody who could drive his car out for him, because he can't drive it out himself, you know, because his wife's pregnant, so Ralph thought quickly and decided we could make a nice honeymoon out of a nice trip to California like that.
Tom, your daughter's getting married.
I'm not deaf, Aggie. Jane, that's very nice.
Well, anyway, Ralph finishes his school term on November 3rd. That's tomorrow, and that's just 3 weeks before he starts the winter session. He's teaching the regular winter session this year, so we decided, both of us, that November 6th was just perfect. So did Father Murphy, and he's announcing the bands this Sunday at Mass and got us a dispensation. We'll have to invite his father and mother for dinner.
Father Murphy's?
No, Ralph's, Mr. and Mrs.
Oh,
Howard.
yeah.
Give me the salt and pepper.
I know it's kind of short notice, Ma, but how about tonight? Could we have them over for dinner tonight?
Well, it's Friday. I'm going to the fish market anyway.
Tonight all right with you, Pa?
Huh? Oh, it's
Tonight's
fine.
all right?
Fine with me, Jane.
I'm sure in the bathroom.
All right, Jack.
Listen, I'll call Ralph and have him bring him over around 7. And, Ma, don't go to any extra trouble, you know? Just fish and potatoes like we always have on Friday night. In fact, one thing I'd like to get straight right now, there's not going to be no big wedding. Just a plain, simple ceremony.
That's the best way, Jane.
No wedding reception, no nothing. Because I want to get an early start for California. The whole thing will only take about 10 minutes.
That's the best way of all, Jane.
No wedding reception, no nothing.
All the fuss and feathers that goes on with all these big weddings. Your cousin John told me it cost him $3,000 to give his daughter Caroline her wedding.
Well, Jane, if it's a small wedding you want, that's what you'll have.
$3,000 for a wedding breakfast, so it's enough to chill your blood.
If we want to take advantage of this honeymoon in the car, we have to get married by November 6th, next Tuesday.
Well, Jane, that's very sensible of you. Anyway, your pa and me thought we'd give you a check for $500.
500?
Oh, for heaven's sake, Tom. Your one living daughter's getting married. Cost you more than $500 if she wanted a reception party.
Well, I didn't say no.
We always said we give the kid a check, but we never specified no figure.
Please, we don't want no checks. We just want to get married.
From 1956, as Debbie Reynolds, as the daughter of parents Bette Davis and Ernest Borgnine, in a wonderful little film. I guess you call it sort of a dramatic family comedy. There's a mix,
kind of a slice of life comedy. Because Jimmy, it's worth noting, the main point to this film is the $500 that Bette Davis has offered to Debbie Reynolds is exactly how much money Ernest Borgnine has saved to buy his medallion so he can own his own cab, which was his big dream.
Yes.
And hence part of the conflict that drives this neat little movie.
Catered Affair from 1956. We highly recommend it. You are listening to KCBX and KCBX HD1 San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara. We're streaming across the world at kcbx.org. We will talk more about the incredible career of Bette Davis in a moment.
You're listening to Take Two on Public Radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara, streaming at kcbx.org, and you can write to us at movies@kcbx.org.
Funds are provided by Michael Novak and the San Luis Obispo Symphony, making their debut at Walt Disney Concert Hall on June 8th, featuring the music of local composer Craig Russell. Details at slowsymphony.com.
Support for KCBX is provided also by Charter Communications, offering home telephone service with digital cable and high-speed internet. There's no equipment to buy, and installation is included. Give them a call at 1-888-438-2427.
We're back on Take Two, the movie program. My name is Jim Dee. I'm here with my good friend Bob Whiteford with I'm calling it the daunting proposition of giving a great spotlight to the career of Bette Davis. What a career it has been. We're rounding out the 1950s. We just talked about A Catered Affair. And again, repeating, this is the time where Bette really did a lot of television appearances, but of course interspersing some screen appearances as well. And as we get into the 60s, once again, we have Bette Davis completely reinventing herself with some self-referential performance. We have to go to the incredible Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And Bob, you know, I was thinking, I was watching Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. First, I got to say this movie utterly creeps me out still after all these years. There's something about this movie. It's the performances. It's just the creepiness of it. And dare I say, Bob, I'm going to go out on a limb here. You know how Brando reinvented, The Godfather, and I think of how Brando looked. I mean, he did Last Tango in Paris after The Godfather. We know he looked great, but he was willing to put the stuff in his mouth and kind of, when you first saw Brando in The Godfather, you're going, my God, this is Stanley Kowalski. I mean, how can he do this? And now it is the icon of the mobster boss, let's just say.
Absolutely.
Now, here's Bette Davis, who has the star quality, this incredible track record, and she stars in a film, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. She's willing to put on this white makeup and have this, these curly Q curls where she looks like a little girl. And also, not a likable character, obviously.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to put it.
Early in Bette Davis's career, they talked about how she was willing to take on some unlikable characters in the John Huston film,
Right. In This Our Life.
In This Our Life, but this is going way out there. And of course, when you look at Whatever Happened to Me, Baby Jane, is this groundbreaking cinema with these great stars? Is it really pushing it forward, or is it kind of tawdry? Is it kind of, pulpy in a way?
Exploitative.
Yeah. I mean, it straddles that line because it is brilliant and it does, after all these years, affect me. I was getting completely, kind of unnerved by this film, and it's 40 plus years old. So there's something going on here that's very powerful, and these two actresses, Joan Crawford and Bette Davis, really getting out there. But maybe it's just that nebulousness. Is it tawdry or is it classic filmmaking? I'm not quite sure.
Well, Jimmy, I think it's worth taking a deep look at this. Because this is a film that very much disturbed me as a young guy, too. And I found I kind of liked it because it disturbed me. Just to rewind just a little bit, now, she was in Pocketful of Miracles, and as Apple's Annie, she looked kind of haggard in that, and that's the last Frank Capra film. But at the end, when everything comes together, she's, all the money, it's like everything works out, and then she gets buffed out to look like, an empress or something to trick somebody. She's glamorous again. So it's almost like the frumpy Apple's Annie, as delightful as she was, it was like a fairy tale. That wasn't real. Here she is all glamorous and elegant. And now, thank goodness. You don't get that with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
No.
She looks haggard, fierce, psychotic. The way she shuffles around in those slippers, and she's in the bag 24 hours a day, and that cigarette dangling from her mouth.
The cabinet filled with empty Johnny Walker bottles. I mean, there's 24 of them in there.
And, this film was directed by Robert Aldrich, who did such films as The Dirty Dozen, also did The Killing of Sister George. He also did the original version of, what was that? Kiss Me Deadly, with Ralph Meeker as Mickey Spillane's hero, Mike Hammer. His film Au revoir is actually, he's another filmmaker like Richard Brooks that doesn't get talked about a lot. I think this film it's so subversive on so many levels. And I think just as a starting point was casting Bette Davis and Joan Crawford together in a film because these two hated each other's guts. I mean, it was brutal. But whoever dreamt this one up was a genius because they're both kind of playing weird types. Bette Davis is the embittered, drunken, psychotic sister, and Joan Crawford, who, look, folks, you can say what you will about Joan Crawford, but she never was the victim like she is in this film. She's crippled, she's helpless, she's naive, and she's intimidated. And whoa, the chemistry works, I think, far better than Robert Aldrich and whoever dreamt this one up could ever imagine.
But then again, of course, if they hated each other off screen, I mean, that's what we're going for on screen. And
all I can think is poor Joan Crawford, because Bette Davis gets to play out her hate. Well, Joan Crawford don't. She's there to be abused, and boy, is she ever.
Of course, I don't want to give too much away, but if those of our listeners who haven't seen it, there is sort of a twist ending to Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but still, the abuse is overwhelming.
It's It's fascinating. And let's not forget, Jimmy, one of our favorite guys, Victor Buono,
who is extremely creepy.
Oh my God, he leaves it kind of like he's at his sweaty, swarmy best in this. And of course, Bette Davis is trying to seduce him. Victor Buono? Holy smokes. But he's got to go home to his mother.
Well, I think what was also happening with, to give you a little bit of a time reference, when Bob was talking about Pocket Full of Miracles, Bette Davis starred in that in 1961. And 1962, here we have Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I think Baby Jane also owes a little bit to Sunset Boulevard, where we kind of really realize what's happening to these stars. Norma Desmond, a nice role model for Baby Jane. And then, of course, we want to think of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which was, 1960? And I think also we're getting into the 60s, and filmmakers are pushing the boundaries and trying to, get us worked up, because there was some new freedoms also. But again, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, for me, for my money, it still is creepy, because these actresses were willing to just go way, way out.
It's horrible, it's uncomfortable, it's exploitative, and I love it. It's just a great movie.
Here's a scene with Joan Crawford and Bette Davis from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Oh, you brought my lunch. A bit early, isn't it?
Then what were you ringing for?
Oh, I wanted to tell you something's wrong with the telephone. Maybe it's been left off the hook downstairs.
Is that so? Who'd you want to call, Blanche?
Well, actually, I wanted to call Bert Hanley.
Oh, our business manager.
Yes. There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you.
Well?
Well, I'm afraid I have bad news about money. See, the point is, Bert thinks we'll probably have to sell the house.
Why should we have to sell the house, Blanche?
Well, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Our financial position is such that we can't afford to.
Got plenty of money invested, I know.
Yes, that's quite true, but some of those investments aren't paying much.
When did our business manager tell you all this?
Early last week, I think.
He didn't call here last week, I know that too.
No, we didn't actually speak on the telephone. He wrote me a letter.
He didn't write you any letter either. There hasn't been a letter from his office.
Yes, Jane, there has.
Oh, you're a liar. You're just a liar. You always were. Bert Hanley never wrote you any letter and never called you on the phone telling you to sell the house. You called him 4 weeks ago and told him to sell it.
I did nothing of the sort.
Don't you think I know everything that goes on in this house?
Boy, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And folks, I got to tell you, they're just getting started. That spirals out of control. That's sort of the tamer sections of the conflicts between these two in this very creepy movie.
Might add, Jimmy, great music score by the immortal Frank Duvall.
And as we were saying, as we're listening to that clip, like back in the Warner Brothers days, Max Steiner used to, with every theme, with every spoken word, he used to, color the notes to shade what was being said. It's kind of happening here as well.
I found that kind of interesting. There's a great observation, Jimmy, because it does. When you listen to the clip, it kind of harkens back to the great films of the 40s. But it's not, in a sense. It's very different. What's going on.
And what's different going on, too, in the career of Bette Davis is she does get somewhat pigeonholed in this latter part of her career, or shall we say the second part of her career. We were talking about how she was known for the romantic dramas of the 40s, and as we get into the more seasoned 50s and now we get to the 60s, In some of the biographies that we read, she gets kind of labeled as a horror movie matron, which I don't think is quite fair because there were quite a number of films that didn't have that tone. We will say Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, yes, and then another one that came a few years later, Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, again teaming up with Olivia de Havilland, would again brand her with this label as being in so-called scary or horror films.
Well, this is kind of an interesting movie, Jimmy, because it's Robert Aldrich at the helm again, and originally Joan Crawford was signed on to do it with Bette Davis. They were going to bring the girls back for one more encore, kind of a Southern Gothic horror film. I mean, just the thought of Bruce Dern's decapitated head bouncing down some steps before the credits even roll gives you an idea of just how delightful this little number is. But at the last second, Joan pulled out. Olivia de Havilland, who was a lifelong friend of Bette Davis and was also a star from that era as well, and was beginning her move in this direction as well. Think of Lady in a Cage with James Caan, which is also another psychotic film. But this is it's an interesting film. It's got a lot of twists and turns to it. It's definitely worth watching.
And what's interesting, Bob, is I guess I didn't know until you just mentioned Joan Crawford was originally going to be involved in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which originally was titled Whatever Happened to Cousin Charlotte.
Aha!
There you go. Here's a scene from Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Bette Davis is the suffering widowed, not widowed, but of course losing her boyfriend way back when, Bruce Dern. And she's still agonizing and still haunted by it. And here in a scene, she is missing him, and she is comforted by the great Olivia de Havilland. This is from 1964, Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte.
Come to bed, Charlotte. Come to bed.
Miriam. He really isn't here, is he? Just now, I thought I heard... Sometimes at night when I wake up, it seems as if he really is here. Don't turn on the light. It's not real when it's light. It's only real when it's dark. Dark and still.
I won't turn on the light. Come along. You must go to bed.
It's from Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, another film with lots of twists and turns and a wonderful vehicle, even though, again, it's interesting to compare early Bette Davis from the 40s to these roles. I mean, she, my wife Patty was talking about her and saying, like, boy, later on she had to accept these roles. And, I guess that's one way of looking at it. This isn't all about Eve, of course. However, I want to say that to the credit of the great Bette Davis, I mean, maybe even if she was over the top in some of these films, I still felt that her presence lent more credibility, more to it than perhaps than what was on the written page.
I agree with you, Jimmy. I think we've had the fortune of having Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte for over 40 plus years now to go back and look at over and over again. And I would think at the time they were made, I think she was falling into the trap that seems to happen to actresses always, is it's really tough when you get older to get work. And I don't think it's any different now than it was back then.
Well, in All About Eve, Margot, the Bette Davis character, has reached 40, and she's starting to realize that, oh my gosh, I think I may be getting over the hill or over the hill.
And she's being pushed by a young tarantula type actress who's on her way up.
Mm-hmm.
And it, interestingly enough, in the film, you see a very young Marilyn Monroe making a cameo, not unlike what Bette Davis did with Pat O'Brien in Hell's House 20 years before. So the formula stays the same. What we have with these films, like Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, is they're horror, they're exploitation, but they're also well-made films. Robert Aldrich is a first-rate filmmaker. Robert Aldrich, I think, also treated her with a lot of respect. I also believe that being the consummate professional that she was right up, like you said, Jimmy, earlier on, she worked right till the day she died, practically. She brought a little something extra to these films, being she's an artist. Okay, the ship has sailed, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to give my best performance. And I think she's really good in both of these films. Certainly her performance, along with Olivia de Havilland and Joan Crawford, elevate these films to, I would say, very much a, what's the word I'm looking for? These are not, I would call these real legitimate A-list films.
Oh, me too.
Done really well. And they're acting really, especially Bette Davis's. In Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, she's crazy, she's scary, you relate to her, and you feel for her all at the same time. And that's the mark of a great artist. She invokes all those feelings in us as an audience. So, yeah, it almost seems criminal that she would have to do these, and Joan Crawford had to do these, and Olivia Havilland had to do these, because especially later in the string, they get pretty bad, but at least they bring their A game. They're professional.
I agree with you, Bob. And now, I mean, one thing I want to talk about before we play our last couple of clips in our tribute to Bette Davis is what's interesting, Bob, is, of course, we talked about originally Bette Davis signed by Universal and dumped after her first 7 films, picked up by Warner Brothers, historical part of her career. Then she's with 20th Century Fox with a number of films. But what's interesting is her bouncing over to Great Britain and working for Hammer Films. And of course, you and I, big fans of Hammer Films and the Christopher Lee vampire, Dracula, this sort of things. But Hammer also was a production company that made other types of films, even though some of the ones that, well, the one we're going to talk about next called The Anniversary is not a horror film unless we talk about Bette Davis being the mother from hell. But it's interesting, The Nanny, also a production of Hammer, and here is Bette Davis going abroad to star in, which is nothing too much out of the ordinary, but still, again, there's that work ethic of Bette Davis, and she's working in these very interesting films with all these great British actors.
Well, you know, Jimmy, back in the mid to late 60s, it was not unusual for Europe was, as we had mentioned on this show, was actually making way more movies over there than they were over here. And the formula used to be that you got some funding and you got an American star. And it didn't matter, you know, if no one else could speak English, but if you got an American star. And Hammer tapped into this with a couple of Bette Davis vehicles, both of which are very good. And they, like you mentioned, Jim, they're different from your typical Hammer fare. The Nanny, which is shot in black and white, which for Hammer in the 60s almost seems to be running against the grain of what they're standing for. It's a good, taut little psychological thriller about a psychotic nanny played to the hilt with just the proper bit of repression and psychosis by Bette Davis. And then she shows up in The Anniversary, which is an adaptation of a play of, as you said, the mother from hell, because where she was beaten down by her mother and now Voyager, now she gets to pay back by beating down not one, not two, but her 3 sons, and it's a role she relishes, along with her eye patch.
And the eye patch is red to match her dress. Here is Bette Davis, the mother from hell, in the anniversary. She's commenting on her son's fiancé, and again, the red dress and a red eye patch.
Let me take a good look at you. Tommy's taste is changing. He used to like a lot of flesh. You wouldn't fetch much on the butcher's slab. Is she sleeping in the guest room, Tommy?
That's the general idea, Mum.
I've been meaning to buy a new bed. When Tom has guests, I never get a good night's sleep. All that creaking. But then he has so much energy. He has to use it up somehow.
Ooh. You always want your mom talking about your sex life, your family.
In front of your fiancé. Oh, brother.
That's the great Bette Davis in the anniversary, a British production of Hammer Films in 1968. And, you know, Bob, we're just going to whiz through that. She was in a number of films up to 1989, where she died, and continuing her television appearances. Burnt Offerings in 1976, again tagged with maybe the horror cliche. Watch Her in the Woods in 1980. I'm just throwing out a few titles. At least essentially her last film, she played the role of Libby Strong in Lindsay Anderson's The Whales of August. This is 1987. Despite how old the cast is in this little film, it is just great to see Bette Davis playing with Lillian Gish, Vincent Price, and Ann Sothern, and directed, as I mentioned, by Lindsay Anderson.
One of the all-time great filmmakers.
It's a very quiet film based on a play, but I just love having this document, and it's probably essentially her last performance. I mean, according to our notes here, Bette Davis's last film is Wicked Stepmother from 1989, and I don't really know a whole lot about that. I do know about The Whales of August. In fact, here's a clip from Whales of August, essentially Bette Davis's last film. She's reminiscing about her days with her good friend Lillian Gish.
Tomorrow was our anniversary, Philip's and mine.
As you know, Valentine's Day is Matthew's and my anniversary.
Was I a good matron of honor?
You stepped on my train. Sarah, when was it that you, Matthew, and I took that trip west?
It was after the war, dear. Philip had been dead for over a year.
Yes, of course. Matthew and I thought it would be good for you. But you still crept away to be alone, like you and Philip always did.
Just because you and Matthew weren't affectionate.
For heaven's sake, Sarah. There is no need to make whoopee every other minute.
There she is, Bette Davis in The Whales of August, talking to the great star of the silent and sound screen, Lillian Gish. And a treat to see her at that age. I think she was about 79 when she made this film with Lindsay Anderson. Well, Bob, what a career. Bette Davis, born in 1908, is it? And died 1989, in a career for the ages that we're all the better for.
Absolutely, Jimmy. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope everybody out there has enjoyed it as well.
We'll be back again next week with another edition of Take Two.